This is the second part of the second lecture, and we're going to talk about various different types of automatic thinking. The first is automatic goal pursuit, and this is most likely to arise when we have two or more conflicting goals. One common one that the book gives you is we oftentimes have a conflict between trying to do well in a class and helping other people. Maybe this is something none of you came across, but I personally vividly remember my father telling me not to help my peers in classrooms because then they might have grades closer to mine. I, of course, had a horrible time ever following that advice because it just didn't make any sense to me. But it is ultimately a conflicting goal of trying to be kind, but also not wanting others to surpass you. Another common one where we come across this is wanting to help out with donations, but only having limited funds ourselves. And so the need to eat and make sure you have enough funds to pay rent oftentimes conflicts with the ideologies and goals of being a kind human being. This actually happens a lot in real life, and it need not be so obvious. Now, when they are these conflicting goals, the situational context we find ourselves in is likely to influence what actions and goals we end up embarking on. So the example of trying to figure out whether you should keep your money for yourself or donate some of it to someone else who is, let's say, down and out on the side of the street, the likelihood of you donating will actually go up if you see someone give some money to them as they're walking in front of you. When we have only singular goals, the environment is less likely to have an impact as we're already committed and there's nothing else distracting us or conflicting with that particular goal. A demonstration of this, Sharif and Noren Zayan, I'm going to say, in 2007 conducted a study called God is Watching You, Priming God Concepts Increases Pro-Social Behavior in an Anonymous Economic Gain. Again, this should be on iLearn soon. So in this study, participants were told that they were taking part in two separate studies. They weren't actually two separate studies, this was just told to the participants so they did not draw a connection between the two different tasks. The first task was a sentence unscrambling task, and this has for a long time been used as a method of priming. And it's very similar to an anagram except with sentences. So an example here would be you would get 5 words, felt, she, spirit, the, and eradicate, and you would be asked to make a 4-word sentence out of these 5 words. And so this could be assembled into she felt the spirit. And oftentimes what one will do in these unscrambling tasks to prime people is you will have a theme of words embedded into these sentences such that each sentence has one of those thematic words, and this will result in various concepts being primed for the person who's taking part in the study. And oftentimes people are so focused on unscrambling the sentences that they tend not to notice the pattern of words that are present. That is of course not true for everybody. The second part of the study was a goods dilemma, or a variant of one of the commons dilemmas. And here what happened is, at the end of the experiment, the participants were given 10 $1 coins, or tokens, and they were told that they could leave any amount for the next participant, and the next participant would of course not know who they were, so it was completely anonymous. And so here, imagine yourself, you had just finished a bunch of these sentence unscrambling tasks, and then the experimenter comes, gives you this little stack of coins and says, okay, how many will you keep for yourself and how many will you leave for the next participant? And you can take all 10 of them and keep the $10 for yourself. You could leave all 10 for the next person, or some combination in the middle. So that's how the experiment was set up. The manipulation consisted of different types of words embedded in the sentence scrambling task. The original part of the experiment only compared God-related words to neutral random words, though they did a second part of the study in which they included fairness-related words to see if there were additional ways of priming certain types of egalitarian goals. The idea of using God-related words was the idea that there are many concepts across many religions of being civic-minded and caring for your other society members and trying to pay when you can, and so on and so forth. The experimenters found that when people were primed with God-related concepts, they actually left an average of $4.50 for the next participant, compared to only leaving about $2.50 when they were neutrally primed, or primed with no words or concepts really, which is a pretty stark difference. It is interesting to note here that almost no one, or the average is not even half, which is, I suppose, telling. But if you look at the actual data in the experiment itself, there are a few people in the God prime who left the full $10, whereas there are no such participants in the neutral prime. They wanted to compare this to fairness-related words, so they tried to promote civic mindedness by saying things like contract or community and so on and so forth. And this also increased how much people were likely to leave money, a total of, again, almost $4.50, about 10 cents lower on average than for the God prime. Here you can see that something as trivial as solving some anagrams that have a little bit of a theme to them can change how much money we donate to other people. And again, here is that conflict I described earlier of wanting to keep some money for yourself because it is the sensible thing to do in many ways, especially during these times, or really in most times for most people. And the other is trying to be a good and helpful person. And these are two conflicting goals. And here you can see that something as subtle as showing a few words can change our donation behavior. It might raise the question if anybody who's seeking charities should actually just send puzzles to most of us that have these themes embedded into them before they ask for our money. Moving on to automatic decision making. Now, decision making is oftentimes thought of as one of the hallmarks of conscious and deliberative thought, and well, that is true. We can sit and think about and deliberate over what decision to make and then make the decision. But it can also happen automatically. A common example that people experience in this regard is we can mull over and think about a decision endlessly, going back and forth and not really make any headway whatsoever, finally get fed up, go do something else for a while, and in the middle of doing something else, all of a sudden the answer seems as clear as day to us. In a way, we've made our decision now without having actively thought about it. Some part of our mind just automatically took care of it. And interestingly, research has demonstrated that too much conscious thought about a choice can get in the way of making a good decision. A common one that one of my peers uses an example of this is, imagine being at a store where you're trying to buy a backpack and there are two different backpacks that are about the same in coolness and functional qualities, and you just keep going back and forth and you can't really decide which would be a good one to get. Another one of these is friends trying to decide where to get food. Even if you've all decided you want noodles, how do you decide the difference between a great Italian place and a great ramen place? And people can just bounce back and forth for hours sometimes. Research has also shown, which we'll talk about in just a moment, that distraction can actually help the process. It is important to note that distraction before deliberating does not confer any benefits. One must have spent at least some time consciously deliberating between your options before using distraction, at least to get any benefits. In a study by Norgren, Boss, and Dickerhuis in 2011, which is titled "The Best of Both Worlds: Integrating Conscious and Unconscious Thought Best Solves Complex Decisions." Here, participants in this experiment were given 12 apartments, hypothetical ones, to choose from, and each apartment had 12 different qualities. And each of the apartments ranged on how many good, neutral, and negative qualities they had. And while it wasn't that each was in a unique combination, there were a few that were classified as good. I believe they had 8 good qualities, and then 2 neutral and 2 negative, and then there was the neutral apartments that had 4 of each, and then there was a negative, which was the converse of the good apartment, or something to that effect. Now, they tested 4 different types of decision making in getting people to decide on what apartment they would eventually go for, and to see how often they chose those quote-unquote best apartments, or the apartments with the most number of positive traits. And they tested either having people make a decision immediately after they had seen the last quality of the 12th apartment, or spending a few minutes consciously just thinking about what apartment to choose. Another few minutes they could have spent just doing a distractor task and then being asked to make a decision. And the other or final condition was they spent 2 minutes consciously deliberating and then 2 minutes doing some distraction task. And here the results are actually quite interesting. People made their worst decisions when immediate choice was required. Only about 14% of the time did participants select one of the best apartments. The numbers are actually roughly equal for conscious only versus unconscious only choice made. And here a little under 30%. I believe one was 29.2 and the other was 29.6 or something like this. A slight benefit towards the conscious only, I believe. The best choice ultimately though came from when people used this combination of spending a few minutes deliberating over some task and then spending a few minutes just doing something completely different. And here almost 60% of people were able to choose one of those best apartments. Now, whether the 2 minutes and 2 minutes is fundamentally important or just the general idea of spending some time deliberating and then some time doing something else before having to make your decision, I'm not 100% sure on that. But one of the things to take away here is that if you're spending hours and hours going back and forth between two different choices, perhaps go do something else for a little while and then go for it. Of course, this doesn't take into account how many people suffer from things like choice paralysis or just decision fear, and those are real things, but we won't really talk about them here. Another thing that affects our thoughts and decisions are our bodies, and these often do so in an automatic way. And I mean automatic in the sense that we're not consciously aware of how the states of our bodies impact our decisions. But it is important to note that our bodies and brains are basically a singular organism. For a long time, there's been a disconnect between the brain or the mind and the body itself, but that is not the most efficient distinction to make. You could do it for, autopsy reasons or specific study reasons where you're interested in one specific organ, but other than that, the creature is all one creature. It works together, right? After all, there's a huge cluster of neuronal populations in our gut, which leads some credence to the idea of gut feelings. It's far more complicated than just the intuitions we get from our stomachs, but nonetheless. Okay, a lot of the times when we're comparing anything really in the world, we do so in reference to our own body. This is why if oftentimes you're watching some kind of action movie and someone's head gets cleaned or cleaved straight off or something like this, or when someone gets kicked in the groin, many of us tend to reach for our own body parts and cringe in this effect. We're using our own body in those cases as a way to understand and interpret the world around us. It has really strange impacts too. In fact, one study showed that students rated certain items on school policy as being more important when they had a heavy clipboard to answer the survey on as compared to a light one. This is believed to activate the idea that more important things have more weight to them versus things that are more trivial or flippant tend to just be lighter concepts closer to comedy. Now, just something to consider before we talk about the next experiment, but do you imagine that you would think differently when you were clean, fresh out of the shower versus grimy? You're sweaty, you had gone for a long run and dug a trench or something to that effect. Well, I don't know about a study directly done to see about the sweat and dirt content on our bodies, but they have shown a result of the sense around us having a dramatic impact on our decision making. So here, Lillenquist, Zhang, and Galinsky in 2010 conducted a study called The Smell of Virtue: Clean Scents Promote Reciprocity and Charity. And so here it was a relatively straightforward experiment. Researchers had participants come into a room that was either scented with some kind of citrus, Febreze, or Windex or something like this, or had no spray and scents whatsoever in the room, and then they compared their differences along several different behaviors. The first and probably most stark is asking people whether they would be willing or not to donate to a charity. And here the difference is quite telling. 22% of people were willing to donate to a charity when they were in the room that was scented with the citrus smell, which is oftentimes associated with cleanliness, and only 6% of people were willing to donate when there was no spray at all. Just quickly before we go into the next two, There was a really interesting little news blurb that came out now several years ago about how in Japan, Dunkin' Donuts, which I'm not sure if people know what it is, it's a donut chain, that Dunkin' Donuts made a deal with the busing companies, and so they would have Dunkin' Donuts outlets, shops, donut shops, whatever you'd call them, close to the bus stops. And they would actually spritz a little bit of coffee scent into the buses right before people got off. And this actually dramatically increased the number of people who went into Dunkin' Donuts to get a cup of coffee and buy some donuts. Crazy, right? Okay, moving on. It also changed their willingness to give money. So this was another task like we talked about earlier, where ostensibly some other participant sent them all of the money they could for a total of $4. And because they were really kind about this, that money then got doubled to or tripled to $12, out of which the actual participant now could choose how much to send back to the original sender. And here you see that again the clean scent made a difference, where in that clean citrusy smell, about $5.3 on average were returned to the sender compared to only about $2.8 in the no smell room. This scent also had an impact on volunteering, where people were more likely to volunteer on a scale of 1 to 7 when they were in this sweet smelling room as compared to one without any kind of scent in it. Now, there are some studies to show that you can push this in the opposite direction when you put people in foul-smelling situations, which also is quite interesting, and I believe has long-term impacts for how we develop our urban centers and the likely things to happen with overcrowding, forced migration, and the climate change problems that we're all dealing with. Jumping then into heuristics. So heuristics are judgmental or decision-making strategies, and we rely on these pretty much all the time, but specifically when we don't know exactly what to do or we have too many options to choose from. A very simple way of thinking about that is you might have thought to yourself before you go for a brunch, even though these days you probably don't go anywhere for brunch, but imagine back to the times where you did, and you were like, today I'm going to have one of the specials, and you go there and someone comes and is like, aha, what would you like for breakfast today, kind person? And you're looking at all of these delicious looking specials and it's like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, I'll just have the regular, please. And in this case, that is what you default to. It is the regular thing to choose, and you've chosen it all the time. It's a common decision strategy that you have, and because one is overloaded with all the various choices, one tends to just snap back to what one knows or is familiar with. This is also called specifically the status quo bias. Now, heuristics are very similar to schemas. You can think about the distinction being that schemas are more about knowledge, what is the main prototype of a fruit or a bird, whereas a heuristic is more about actions. So I will always get on a bicycle in the same way, even though I could technically get on it from the other side, but that would just feel weird to me because I've done it so many times, and I don't even have to think about it because, well, again, I've done it so many times and have a heuristic for how to get on a bicycle. Further, I could use that heuristic then to get on a motorcycle, even if I have never ridden a motorcycle before. As mentioned with schemas in the previous part of this lecture, heuristics can be highly adaptive. In fact, they are a lot of the time, but they can lead us astray as well. And that is a large focus of social psychology. We'll talk specifically about two of these heuristics, the availability heuristic and the representative heuristic. The availability heuristic refers to a judgmental rule that we use, and when using it, our decisions are based on the ease with which something comes to mind. So if you always use a butcher's cleaver to crack a coconut, you probably won't think to use a hammer, even though it would probably work equally as well. Right? You've done it so many times with the cleaver, that is what comes to mind readily when you have to break open a coconut. Versus the converse could be true. If you've always used a hammer, then you'll think about using a hammer and it won't occur to you to use the cleaver, even if both things are sitting in easy reach. So here, Schwartz et al. In 1991 conducted a study to test the effects of the availability heuristic. Researchers wanted to test if the readiness with which things came to mind impact our perceptions of ourselves. So again, the readiness of things coming to mind is a direct test of the availability heuristic. They had participants write down either 12 or 6 times in which they had been assertive in the past. Now, of course, it's not the same participants doing both tasks. Half the participants are writing 6 times and half of them are writing 12 times. And then they had them rate on a scale of, I believe, 1 to 7, how assertive these people felt they were. And here, those who were in the 6 condition, meaning they wrote down 6 times that they were assertive, rated themselves as being more assertive than those people who wrote down or had to write down 12 times in which they were assertive in the past. They also tested the converse. They had another set of participants write down either 6 or 12 times that they had been unassertive in the past. And this time, those in the 12 condition rated themselves as being more assertive than the 6 condition. So what's going on? Chances are, being able to write 6 times that you were assertive in the past is easier to do than 12 times that you were assertive in the past. For most people. For some people, it's no trouble at all, and for some people, even writing 6 times that they were assertive would be horribly difficult. But on average, it will be easier to come up with 6 times in the past versus 12 times. And because you can easily fill up the number of times you're required to think about a time in which you were assertive, the internal dialogue goes something to the effect of, well, I could easily come up with the number of times I needed to say that I was assertive in the past, so I must be an assertive person. Versus if you struggle to fill up all 12 of them, perhaps you think to yourself, couldn't even do something so simple as filling out 12 of these assertive statements about my own past. I must not be as assertive as I thought. Now, I'm just giving words to those internal thoughts. Chances are this does not happen in a conscious way and is automatically processed sort of in the background. The converse happens for being unassertive. Here again, you can easily think about 6 times, on average, that you were unassertive in the past versus having more difficulty writing down 12 times you were unassertive. If you struggle to write down the complete number or 12 times of being unassertive in the past, then you must not be that unassertive, and by converse, you're an assertive person. Whereas the 6 times, you can fairly easily fill that in, and therefore come to the conclusion that you might actually be more unassertive than you thought you were, thus being less assertive. Now, it is, I think, a hilarious note that a professor somewhere in the past used a similar scheme to improve their student evaluations. A way in which I could do this would be at the end of the semester, I would just tell all of you if you could please fill out a form with 20 different things I could do to be a better professor. While some of you will no doubt be able to fill out that entire sheet, coming up with 20 different ways a person can be a better professor is probably difficult for anybody involved. And because one would have difficulty filling those out, the internal correction will be, this professor is probably a pretty good professor. You could do the converse if you wanted to have a professor's ratings go down, where you just have people fill out 2 different ways in which that professor could be better, and since one can do it so easily, the chances are the internal dialogue switches towards, well, that professor isn't that great anyway. Wild. The next heuristic is the representative heuristic, and this refers to a mental shortcut whereby people classify something according to how similar it is to a typical case or prototype. And here's an example for you. So imagine Bob. Bob is an opera fan who enjoys touring art museums when on holiday, and growing up, Bob enjoyed playing chess with family members and friends. Now, which of these 2 statements about Bob are more likely? Bob plays the trumpet for a major symphony orchestra, or Bob is a farmer? Just give you a moment to think about that. Now, while of course I can't look at all of your faces and you can't look at mine and know that I really love these types of trick questions, and chances are, well, it might be difficult here, but most of my classes pretty quickly catch on that I love these and then tend to choose the opposite of what they think is probably the answer, but we won't go into that too much. If you decided that Bob plays the trumpet for a major symphony orchestra, you are most certainly not alone. Many people will choose that, even though, going on the information given, that is not actually the best choice to take. it is much more likely that Bob is a farmer. The reason for this is, currently in the United States, there are just a touch over 1,200 orchestras. And while most are certainly not large orchestras, let's just, for the sake of argument, assume that all of these orchestras are large. And so they would each contain about 90 people. That makes a total of 112,000 people who play in a major orchestra. And we'll just leave it at that and not even consider the trumpet part for now. So you have 112,000 people who could be Bob. But on the other side, there are 2.6 million farmers in this country as well. And the likelihood of Bob being a farmer is far greater. Right? It's almost, 25 times as likely that Bob is a farmer than Bob is a trumpet player for a major symphony orchestra. If we wanted to be technical about it, there are actually only an average of 4 trumpet players per orchestra. Thus, the number of people who could play trumpet for a major symphony orchestra is only a little under 5,000 people. Comparing the odds of someone being a professional trumpet player versus a farmer, the odds are pretty heavily in favor of Bob being a farmer. This is also called the base rate fallacy, which I'm going to talk about now on the next slide. Base rate information refers to information about the frequency of members of different categories in a population. Now, to illustrate this example, imagine you just got screened for a rare form of cancer and got a positive test back. Now, this test is 95% accurate, and only about 1 in 1,000 people actually have this disease, which is really unlucky for the hypothetical you who just got this positive result. Now, the first thing I'd like to ask is, does that second piece of information matter, or is it just shit luck? I mean, probably because I'm making such a big deal about this, it does matter. So one way in which you can go about finding out what the actual odds are that you have this form of cancer is to first assume that there is some town, A we'll call it, and this town has 20,000 people in it, of which you are one member. Now, a note here before we go too much further, the number 20,000 is completely arbitrary. I have only used 20,000 because it makes the numbers we're going to use all be whole numbers, but you could technically use the number 1 and get the same odds. It's just for most people when they're learning this concept, to deal with fractional human beings is just a weird concept. But you could also have 200 billion if you wanted, and it would work out to be exactly the same with just much larger numbers. So the first thing to do to try and figure out what the actual chances are that you have this disease is to draw a box and divide it into 4 quadrants. The next will be to label this box, where you will ultimately have sick and healthy people in these rows, and you will divide the columns into positive and negative. Of course, if you wanted to swap this and have sick and healthy up here and positive and negative down there, that's your prerogative. Where you put them is not so important, just that you know that the healthy and sick, which are the 2 possibilities of you either have cancer or you don't, are together, and the results of the test are either positive or negative. Okay, the next thing to do is to identify the chances of, or how many of this town have this cancer and how many do not. So we have now said that 1 in 1,000 people get this disease. Right? That means out of 20,000 people, the odds are 20 people have the cancer, they are sick, and the remaining 19,980 people are healthy. They don't have the cancer. Right? Continuing on, if we assume this test is 95% accurate, that means of the 20 people who actually have the cancer, 19 of those are correctly identified by the test as having or being tested positive, thus having this form of cancer. Right? 95% of 20 is 19. Of course, that allows one person to slip through the cracks. One person who actually has the cancer but receives a negative test from this test screening for cancer. We're going to do the same thing for all of the healthy people, or the people who do not have cancer. Out of those 19,980 people, 18,981 people are correctly identified by this test as being negative for this cancer. Right? They're healthy people and they are identified as being negative. We get the 18,981 by multiplying taking 95% of 19,980. Of course, this leaves 990 people who get a positive test back from this cancer screening, even though they are healthy. Okay? If you need, please take a moment to pause this and just make sure you're comfortable with how we filled out this table. Next, we will calculate the actual chance of having this disease. And the way in which we do that is we take the number of people who are actually sick and got a positive test back, and we divide that by the total number of people who got a positive test. This is how we calculate odds. Here you can see that I have 19 people who were sick and tested positive, and I'm dividing it by 1,018, which is just the 19 people who were sick and tested positive plus 999 people who were healthy but also tested positive. And this results in a decimal of 0.0187 rounded, and you could convert that to percentages of about 1.87%, and this is the likelihood that you actually have this form of cancer after getting a positive test, assuming the test is 95% accurate and 1 in 1,000 people get this disease. There is a very big difference between 95% and 1.87, even though many people, when they come across this type of information, will only hear about this test being accurate because this is not always available information, and people will rarely ask about what the base rate is of the various illness or problem. Now, please note that if this is even more unlikely, for example, the base rate was 1 in 1 million, this percentage would go down even further. It makes it even more unlikely, right? Because remember, this is where that is all getting played out, where you could have thousands upon thousands of people who are all negative, but because of even a small loss in accuracy, a large number of them will look like they have whatever the ailment is. The converse will happen if the base rate is very low. For example, if it's 1 in 2 people get a disease, this is going to be dramatically higher. This is one of the fundamental ways in which base rates have a huge impact on our understanding of the world around us, and we tend to overlook this in many, many situations. This is also why it is so useful to use contingency tables, which is what we have drawn up here, to allow us to actually look through what are all the possible cases. These can also be used for things like how or what is the efficacy of, say, having ginger and chilies to get over a common cold. You could say something like, they have the cold, they don't have the cold, or how long it took them to get better, along with if they had chilies and ginger versus they did not. And you look at how these boxes are ultimately different from each other. If you want the statistics for that, you use what is called a chi-square test. But ultimately, if you're not looking at the cases where things are both true and false, and along with when treatment was given and when treatment was not given, you cannot actually make an informed decision. Now, I'm sorry I went really long on this, and I also won't actually test you on this, but I didn't tell you that in the beginning because that's not code for you can fall asleep during this. This is something that is vitally important to our decision making, especially in today's world where percentage accuracy rates and things like that are abound, but people rarely talk about base rates. It is very important to being able to make informed decisions. Please be aware. Finally, we'll talk a little bit about the representative heuristic, contingency tables, and horoscopes. So the representative heuristic is actually how many horoscopes and personality tests that we come across seem so accurate and how they're able to describe us so well. I recommend reading the personality assessment feedback on page 69. And while you've now most likely heard about me talk about all of these various things and probably how I'll continue at the end of this lecture, or even better, you've read the book already, but please do give it an honest shot and really consider how well it matches you. Now, when we come across such fortunes, we tend to search our memories for events that match the forecast, right? If it says that You know, you've had some rough times recently, chances are you'll think about times where it's been a little bit rough, versus if you're like, ah, life is on the uptick, you'll think back on a few times recently where it actually has been on the uptick. And then we tend to ignore our past where the fortune is inaccurate. And it is this discrepancy that causes us to ultimately associate and believe many of these fortunes, at least the fact that they're accurate, even though they might not necessarily be so. This is also why you can take, for example, the 12 horoscopes, and I apologize if that's something you really subscribe to, and of course, my saying this doesn't need to change your beliefs in any way, but this is one of the reasons why you can take 12 vague statements and make them apply to the 7 odd billion human beings on this planet. If you think that all 7 billion human beings can be sorted into 12 categories, well, I would beg to say that human beings are far more interesting and diverse than can be sorted into 12 simple boxes. Ultimately, we just do not analyze these systematically, and this is why contingency tables are so useful. They allow us to get over our innate biases in confirming pieces of information that are presented to us, and they allow us to actually look at when our beliefs are confirmed and when they are not, and then look at what the odds and ratios are of those different situations.